Welcome back to Truth Hurts, where we expose corrupt politicians and lying corporate media. I'm Jake Duesenberg, your host, broadcasting live from Roseville, Minnesota, in the belly of the beast, the liberal zombie apocalypse of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Join me, as normal, Mr. MAGA Jesse. How you doing there, buddy?
I am doing good, and that's right. We got a big show lined up for you guys here today because Walz is taking responsibility for the Feeding Our Future scam. So there is an audit done by the legislative auditor, so we'll be breaking all of that good stuff down. We've got, from the John Galt Mortgage Company, Tim Chermak, who is going to be joining us for the show today. We'll be talking about Action for Liberty in the news, an update on Otter Tail, and Alex Jones and InfoWars and the personal assets lawsuit going on right now. And Action for Liberty and the Truth Hurts remains the sole lone voices I couldn't get that out, in Minnesota for this anti-establishment conservative movement. And I think a lot of people are aware of that just like InfoWars, they want to shut us down too. So we'll get into all of that.
Did you see these
today.
stories I just added? Washington Post, Hillary should replace Kamala.
I did hear
that's
about
funny.
that. Yep.
And then Pfizer being sued by the Attorney General in Kansas. So we'll try to get to those stories too. Whatever we can't get to, we'll do in the after show or the post show. What do we call it? Post show? Running the dials as normal, Mr. Deep State himself, Dawson. How you doing there, Dawson?
I'm doing good. My core is sore, and my legs are also sore as well.
No questions asked, because I don't want to know the answer. Why is core is sore? I kind of want to know, but I'm not going to ask that question.
Three sets of crunches, and I don't know what the name of the other one is, but 3 sets of that too. Doubling down. It's feeling good. And also, I've taken every single fish oil supplement that I've gotten from the Alex Jones show, so on top of the world right
now. If you want to be part of our conversation, make sure you like, subscribe on Rumble, YouTube, whatever platform, or the new audience on Facebook. We'll be reading comments, especially on Rumble today, but if you're on Facebook, we'll try to get to that. We're going to try Facebook out again, okay? Because YouTube doesn't seem like the place for this show to grow, mostly because they don't want to take our money. They don't want us to advertise. They really don't like us. So anyhow, we're on Facebook. If you want to be a part of the conversation, help the show at any point, hit that Rumble rant. You'll interrupt us. We'll read your comment live on air. And we couldn't do this without our great sponsors, Warren Wessel of Keller Williams Realty. If you're buying a home, you're selling a home, you got to go with someone that's good in the business and someone you could trust. And give Warren a call at 612-419-7453. Also brought to you by John Galt Mortgage Company. When you're buying a home, give them a chance at financing that home. Go to johngaltmortgage.com. I don't need to say much more because we're going to bring Tim Chermak on the show, the CEO of John Galt Mortgage, to talk more about the economy. I think you guys are going to enjoy that segment. So starting off today's show, we got to talk about Walz taking responsibility. Boy, isn't that one of the great lines in politics? Right. Taking responsibility. Tucker, get your mind out of the gutter. Jake, razzle dazzle. Truth hurts. Dave's right, says hello all, and failed candidate says don't skip leg day.
Right, and Billy22. So yeah, we've got people active in the comment section right now.
Let's go to the video here, Dawson. This is KSTP. Tom Hauser reporting on Tim Walz, who did a press conference yesterday. It was not regarding the recent auditor reports, scathing reports, but he has to answer questions on it. Let's go to this here.
We can always do better. I think, again, context matters. It was a challenging time for everybody, but we certainly want to do better. I think we certainly take responsibility for that, appreciate the points that are being made.
Despite harshly critical reports about Feeding Our Future and the $500 million frontline worker pay program, where up to 40% of recipients can't be verified as eligible for payments, no state employees have been specifically held accountable.
Held accountable in terms of their jobs or the things that they're doing. This wasn't malfeasance. And in both of these cases, there's not a single state employee that was implicated in doing anything that was illegal. They simply didn't do as much due diligence as they should have.
Oh, no big deal.
Now, the governor did say there have been leadership changes in some state agencies, most notably the Department of Education that oversaw the Feeding Our Future program. Former Commissioner Heather Mueller was replaced in November of 22 after less than 2 years on the job, although the governor declined to say it was because of the Feeding Our Future fraud.
So, in other words, it definitely wasn't. That's good enough there, Dawson. clearly it wasn't regarding that. We all have a Rumble rant here.
We do, and it is from Gully45, which says trust Kansas, and I'm assuming that's in relation to the Pfizer lawsuit. So
Yeah, I can't wait to
appreciate you coming, putting that out there for us.
Yeah, and I don't think I've seen Gully 45, so new viewer, or at least first time in the comment section. And is there going to be a Gully 47? Gully 4? I'm guessing there's going to be a 47 coming up, right? Trump's going to be 45 and 47. All right, so this is what's interesting to me. So Walz was in the military until he quit to avoid a deployment. What was he, 30 years, something like that in the military? He achieved the rank of Master Sergeant, conditionally promoted Sergeant Major, if we want the record to be accurate. And then that's when he quit to avoid the 1st Brigade deployment to Iraq, which was the longest deployment in modern-day history, 22 total months activation by the Minnesota Army National Guard. Many of our soldiers died overseas in that battle, some coming back wounded. I know a lot of people from that. I was just a young lieutenant, missed that deployment, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I don't know which way you look at it. From a young infantry officer's perspective, it was unfortunately. I really would have wanted to be on that one. So, so Walz, I see what he's doing here. You know what he's doing? He's taking this principle. Jocko Willink, the famous Navy SEAL, motivational speaker, author, generally just seems like a great guy. Jocko would be a good guy to meet someday because, as an Army officer, and he seems to respect Army officers, we have some similarities between, leadership styles, and that leadership style in the book, this first book he wrote was Extreme Ownership, right? Where leaders own things. Walz knows this. Walz grew up, I don't remember, 25, 30 years, whatever it was in the military. He knows about ownership. And so he's pretending. This is where the authenticity is gone, right? He's pretending to take ownership here. I take responsibility. You heard him say it. I take or we should take responsibility. He said it, we, but whatever. He's taking responsibility. That's what the headlines say today. You heard him, his mouth. He's taking responsibility. We're taking responsibility. His administration's taking responsibility. Who's taking responsibility? What? Can you imagine being in charge of a department in a company, and let's just scale this thing by a little. $1 million went to fraudulent payments. Your ass is on the streets. You are fired. You are done with your job. Your department might all be gone. That's extreme ownership.
Right.
Where the firings of this stuff? If you don't know, and you just saw in that report, frontline pay program, 40% unaccounted if they don't even know if these people could do it, plus fraud. $250 million gone from the Feeding Our Future scandal. Pull up this real quick. Sorry, Jesse, I know I cut you off here, but pull this up, Dawson. This is the Office of Legislative Auditors report or review. I guess this is called a special review of the Feeding Our Future. This just came out June of 2024. And this report summary is very important to read. If you see that first bullet point, the Minnesota Department of Education's inaction to strengthen and exercise its authority to deny applications put the feeding programs, integrity at risk. Most notably, MDA failed to address what it sees as limits to its authority years before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And you heard Mr. not really taking responsibility for anything, Walz, saying this happened at a, what did he say, crazy time or challenging time? I think he said challenging time, as if it was a global pandemic and things were happening so fast and we couldn't take account for it. Not according to this report by a neutral party, not partisan, right? Looking at the department, his departments, not accounting for things to stop fraud. Sorry, I cut you out, Jesse. What were you saying?
Well, and also what Walz said was that there was no malfeasance done by the state. How can he try to claim that there was no malfeasance here? There was obviously major issues here, and I can't imagine that this was all done by mistake. This is the kind of thing that this was organized crime. This was an organized money laundering situation. And so for him to claim that there was no malfeasance for the state, and by claiming responsibility like he's doing, really what he's trying to do is cover for all the people in his administration that screwed this up. So by pretending to take the fault, by pretending to take the blame, by taking this responsibility, like you said before, what kind of accountability is there to that? It's just a statement. it's all words. There's no action associated with it. It's not that they're going to be held accountable in any meaningful way. It's not as if we're going to get any kind of information from the Walz administration on this. Like I said, all talk, no action.
But you're saying there's some criminal conduct inside of his administration because you said it's organized crime.
You would figure that.
Do you have evidence to suggest that's true, though?
I'm saying that he can't necessarily make the argument without evidence either that there was no malfeasance done. So it's not that I'm claiming that there is malfeasance. I'm just saying that he can't necessarily claim that there is none at all because there was obviously major issues here, hundreds of millions of dollars missing, and I can't just assume that it was all just a mistake.
Well, and I can assume, okay, but that's a fair point, is that he's just dismissing it. So I see what you're saying. But I could see this just being incompetency of government. This is why we don't like big government, because this is what happens. You have these kind of problems. Once again, you don't need a criminal component from the government agencies to make this thing lead to multiple firings. This is the problem that we have is, and, our audience certainly, conservatives certainly hate fraud. Fraud's always going to exist. The larger government is, the more fraud is going to exist. And you're right. Sometimes it is actually internal jobs. Mm-hmm. Actually, by their nature, sometimes it's leading to fraud because they selectively pick program recipients, right? They don't actually keep things neutral or what's the word, legal term I'm looking for? Equality under the law or whatever I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. So, yes, 100% the stuff's going to continue to happen. But we don't even need a criminal component. We just need the fact that
and
people...
get this, okay? Malfeasance means wrongdoing, especially by a public official. So it's not even like we're talking about a crime or something illegal here. Walz is arguing that there is no malfeasance, no wrongdoing by the state. How can he argue there is no wrongdoing?
Is that the legal definition, by the way? Because I know malfeasance is actually one of the components of recall elections here in Minnesota.
Well, this is Merriam-Webster's, their legal definition.
Yeah, I'd be interested in what a legal dictionary would say on it. But no, I think that's how most people view the term malfeasance, right? Mm-hmm. Tucker says, does that mean county attorneys can now sue Walz? I don't know. What is he getting at there?
I'd assume he's saying for the Feeding Our Future fraud. But I would figure because it's state funds, I'm not sure if a county would have jurisdiction or authority to insert themselves in a case like that.
Well, maybe the new Itasca County attorney can do it.
Yeah, maybe. And yeah, there should be some updates on that tonight, so we'll see what goes on. The county commissioner's got a work session in Itasca County, and it sounds like they're going to be, at least updating the public on some of the information that's coming out. And so hopefully, the Patriots still continue to show up and make it happen because, yeah, Itasca County is they got an attorney situation. I've been hearing about Benton County as well, so I'm going to have to look into that as well.
Yeah, well, you just go where you're needed there, Jesse, right?
Yep.
Dawson, do we have him?
Yep, he's
okay.
in.
So I want you to pull up real quick, and this is what frustrates me tremendously on fraud. This is from John Galt Mortgage Company. I've told you guys this many times in their sponsorship. I think they've been on board now for 2 months. They just tell you who they are. This is the great thing about the company. They just tell you who they are, right? And they believe the same things we believe. So here, and this is like this morning, okay? Here's the total tax burden by state factoring in income taxes and sales property taxes. The biggest surprise to most people is Minnesota. Everyone knows about California and New York being high tax states, but Minnesota's right there with them. You can see that darkest red. We're not that purplish red that New York is, but we're at 10. I think it says 10%. Maybe check my eyes here, but it's 10%. Like really glowing red, darker than the states around us. Of course, we all know the Dakotas much cheaper. This is real stuff. So it's like you squeeze us for the money that we earn or the properties that we own. Meanwhile, there's zero accountability. I don't give a shit if Walz says he's taking responsibility. He's not taking any responsibility here. And they just mismanage hundreds of millions of dollars. How many Minnesota taxpayers could have had zero tax burden by just the amount of fraud that went out the door in the last couple of years? I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, didn't we read somewhere before the show that this is the largest amount of fraud out of any state in the country for the COVID money? Yeah,
this is the largest COVID era fraud, although the programs existed before it. Tim Chermak, CEO of President CEO. I should have looked up the title. The head guy in charge of John Galt Mortgage Company. How you doing there, Tim?
Good, Jake. How are you guys doing? Technically, I'm not the CEO. I'm just a co-founder. Mitch Broderick is the president CEO, but he's actually at a mortgage event today, so I get to hop in and rant about the economy.
Is it president? He's president and CEO. You're saying you got no title.
You know, we're a small enough company where the titles don't mean much right now, but you know, I'm one of the original co-founders. Mitch is the president, CEO, head honcho, emperor of John Galt Mortgage.
Can he make you do push-ups? Who can make others do push-ups? That's the question. That's how we know authority.
Mitch could make me do push-ups.
He can make you do push-ups. Okay, very good. How many can you do in a row?
I haven't tried recently, and I probably don't want to share that on the air because I peaked a long time ago physically. So.
Yeah, you didn't know that question was coming. See, you're Nazi now, Tim.
I sponsored the show, and then they hit me with this.
I know. What am I thinking? This is so dumb. Yeah, then we lost that one. What's your take on this? The fraud in Minnesota. You guys post. I mean, it's just. I love it. I was like, well, how do we transition Tim? Because I want Tim to talk about the economy, things that are going on. You got a unique perspective.
Well, I can share. This is an individual story. It's anecdotal. It's an N of one. But I'm one of those people who was born and raised in Minnesota. A lot of my family members are, own businesses. They're very plugged in Minnesota, very involved in their communities, churches. I still wear Minnesota Twins, Vikings, Wild, Timberwolves gear several times a week. So it's like I'm raised cheering for all those teams. I'm going to be a Minnesota sports fan. But I've lived in Florida now for coming up on 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I don't regret that move at all. I don't know why, when you look at the way that the state is being run, I do not know why anyone who has a choice would stay in Minnesota, whether you're single or, you're married, have, kids, have a family. I don't know why you would stay in Minnesota long term when you look at the trend of where things are going. It's not a battleground state. It's not really up for grabs. No one who actually understands Minnesota politics actually thinks that it's in play and it's going to flip back red anytime soon. You get the government that you deserve. And unfortunately, far left progressives just have a mathematical advantage in Minnesota. There's just more of them than there are conservatives. And so when you look at where do I want to plant my flag, where do I want to raise my family and build a business, like we moved the John Galt Mortgage Company to Florida, even though me and two of the other owners are originally born and raised in Minnesota. Why would we want to pay all those unnecessary taxes for a government that we feel doesn't even represent us at the state government level in Minnesota? And I'll say one more thing about that chart that you were referencing that we shared on social media on the John Galt Mortgage Facebook page. Minnesota, has really high tax burden when you look at income tax, sales, and property taxes. And I compared it to California and New York, but in a sense, it's actually worse than that because keep in mind, these are percentages of people's income in Minnesota that are going towards, state income tax, sales tax, property taxes. The average income in New York and California is a lot higher than it is in Minnesota, right? Mm-hmm. So it's less of a big deal at the individual level if some person who's, making $5 million a year or some, VC in San Francisco is making $100 million a year, if 12% flows to, the government of California, because it's like at that point, it's a rounding error of their wealth. But Minnesota doesn't necessarily have those huge earners like you see in California or on Wall Street, in New York, where there's a lot of people in New York that are making tens of millions of dollars a year who aren't professional athletes, right? So even though the percentages might be higher for the average, middle class or upper middle class earner in Minnesota, the Minnesota state government can actually be more oppressive than even California or New York because those taxes kick in at lower levels. So essentially Minnesota is much more regressive than even those far left, blue states. And unfortunately, I don't have an optimistic message here. I don't see that changing anytime soon. When you look at the demographic patterns in Minnesota, most of outstate Minnesota is shrinking in population, and that's obviously where all the conservative vote is concentrated. So if I look fast forward 10 years from now, like I don't see Minnesota being more conservative than it is today. I see it being less conservative, and that's why we moved, and we'd love to help originate loans for people moving out of Minnesota and moving to a state like Florida or Texas, states that don't hate you, know, and hate.
I guess the way I look at it, so would you say Wisconsin's a more conservative state?
I think every state that borders Minnesota is more conservative, probably including the Canadian province to the north.
Yeah. So Tim, we met back in the Ron Paul days, 2012-ish, and I had moved to Wisconsin, or moved from Wisconsin to Minnesota 2005. A lot of that time I was in the military, so I wasn't really active in politics. But at that time, Minnesota was more conservative than Wisconsin politically. They had a Republican governor. I mean, it is what it is, Tim Pawlenty. Passed constitutional carry. Concealed carry. I think tax burden was probably less at the time, but I can't remember exactly the numbers. And now it's like flipped over. So I kind of look, and I know what you mean. There's a good reason to be bearish on Minnesota when it goes, the next 10 years. But I also could see it flip around.
I would love if it flipped around. So, it's not a message of just nihilism where it's like, let's watch it burn. I would love for it to flip around, because I'm actually secretly planning on buying a lake property somewhere in Minnesota and hopefully spending.
Well, it's not so secret now. I mean,
summers
you kind of screwed that up.
Yeah, well, I'd love to be like a reverse snowbird where I just spend 3 or 4 months in Minnesota and the rest in Florida, get that Florida tax treatment, but still enjoy the Minnesota summers. I mean, my whole family still lives in Minnesota.
Right.
All brothers, cousins. I mean, everyone. I'm like the black sheep who moved away. But I think the problem, and this is true in Minnesota, but this is also true nationally if you look at politics at the federal level, is that many people don't mind the oppressive government because, frankly, they just don't make enough money to where it really hurts them. Mm-hmm. But that's starting to change in states like Minnesota, where now you see like social policies that are getting crazy with all the woke stuff being put into, schools and, the more cultural social issues that the far left is pushing in Minnesota, where maybe if someone's not getting hit with the highest tax brackets in Minnesota, when they see what their kids are going to be forced to learn in Minnesota public schools, things like that. I've actually talked to a lot of people recently who never would have considered moving out of Minnesota. In fact, like without naming them, I have a cousin who lived out of Minnesota for several years because of job out of college, things like that. They moved back specifically to be near family because it was very important that they wanted to be near family when they started having kids of their own. And now they just kind of told me in the last year that we're actually looking at moving out of Minnesota again. Like, ironically, now that we have family, we've seen how much the culture of Minnesota has changed, since we've been back. And it's like, I don't know if we want to plant roots here and have our kids grow up here.
But that must be the Twin Cities, right? Because you get outside the Twin Cities and the culture's great.
Suburbs. Yeah. I mean, I would love nothing more if like South Dakota sent an army and just conquered Western get for themselves all the people who live in outstate. I mean, I think it's like most of outstate is like 70-30 red versus blue, if not 75-25, right? So it's way more conservative even than the Twin Cities, and many of those cities is liberal. So it's a really unfortunate situation that it's a classic example of a 51-49 majority gets to boss the other half of the state around, and they're not moderate at all. I think that's the strange thing about Minnesota, is that historically when a Republican was elected, they were moderate. They didn't do anything super duper conservative. When a Democrat was elected, they were usually pretty moderate. They didn't do anything super duper, left-wing progressive. And now the Democrats in control of Minnesota are just going for broke. They're like making up for lost time and just trying to pass the most obscene bills, both, economic and, social issues, that it's like, this just doesn't resemble the state that I grew up in.
So before I forget, you guys keep me accountable, because I want to pick his brain on the economy, especially the elderly who are moving in the Biden column. K Liquid, by the way. Nick, good to see you, Nick. Also, he says Florida represent. He moved to Florida. What was that, like 5 years ago, something like that, Nick? Another Ron Paul guy. I don't know if you know Nick Karen, but
Oh yeah.
yeah. So Nick, I can't remember where Nick moved in Florida, but anyhow, but you brought up something that's really interesting. Pull up the article, Dawson. Line F10. This is Action for Liberty in the News. This is great. Mort's getting a bunch of interviews. NPR interviewed him, which is great. NPR sometimes doesn't seem like the worst one. Scroll down, Dawson. There's a section here. I'm trying to figure out where this is on Mort. Keep going down. They start, by the way, they start out with Dean Ertl, which is kind of in the neck of woods that you grew up in. And he talks about the stop right there. He talks about the the 3 C's. He says, when I was elected, I decided that 3 things should guide my vote. The 3 C's, right? Ready for him? My conscience, my constituents, and my caucus.
Wow.
No Constitution. I mean, it's like you gave yourself a softball to hit on that. The Constitution, and it's not in there. It's like,
and the caucus is showing that he cares more about what the party wants than what the Constitution says. He cares more about what the Republicans are pushing than he cares about actually restoring our country.
Yeah, Nick moved 2 years ago. God, Nick, I don't know why I was so off on that. Riverview, Tampa area. Okay. It's been a long time, Nick. Although we probably didn't see each other a year or two. God, we stopped watching UFC fights. I don't know how that stuff broke up. I guess we all started having kids, and the kids started getting busy, and is what it is. All right, so, yeah, Dean Ertl. So they're talking about, like, Dean Ertl is this, like, centrist. Everyone knows of him as a moderate. Then they go on, and as you can see on the screen here, they talk about 2 sitting House Republicans, Representative Greg Davids of Preston and Brian Johnson, Cambridge, faced party endorsement challenge this year and lost. We've talked about that on the show. They, along with 4 other House Republicans, are going on to a primary contest in August. Representative Josh Heintzman in Nisswa leads the election campaign for the House Republicans that faces a primary challenge even after winning the local party endorsement. He said that he and his incumbent colleagues had proven themselves to voters and could overcome face-offs with Republican opponents. Quote, more so now than ever, primary voters are pretty clear on what all this is. They've gone through. They've seen the rhetoric, he said. You have some folks on the far right and some folks in the far left, arguably, that are throwing sand. Now, NPR is a step better than the lying Star Tribune, which whenever they talk about Action for Liberty, they say far right. But I think the implication is here that they introduced Mortensen, Eric Mortensen, now president of Action for Liberty, that they introduced him after that quote, that they're probably asserting that they're the far right. And this is what's really interesting. This is what made me think of it. You're right. There used to be moderate Democrats. And the Republicans, the Republican establishment still wants those moderate Republicans. But let me translate that, because this whole dichotomy, this whole left versus right spectrum is all bullshit the way they sell it, okay? It's really collectivism versus individualism. Of course, you guys at John Galt Mortgage love that term, right? The left, they just play the Marxist game. That's all it is. And it's getting further and further crazy to the point where it's the LGBTQIA+, two-spirited, all that. You got to segment the population and assign certain rights to certain groups, right?
The new woke thing is to put the 2S in front. so now
of course it is.
2S LGBTQIA+.
Of course it is, right?
Yep.
So they're just getting more extreme, okay? So then they go, okay, so now then you got the far right as they will put Action for Liberty. It's like, the far right? Here's what we believe in, the Constitution. Fiscal responsibility, like, don't keep spending money you don't have. These are not crazy ideas. They want to cast it like that is extreme. Like, what is so extreme about the views that we have? I guess it's radical in the terms that liberty's radical, but that's not extreme. That's common sense.
If you wanted to, like, balance the budget at either the state level or the federal level, right? That makes you now, in the eyes of most mainstream media, a far right-wing conservative, like far right, if you want to balance the budget. Because at the federal level, it would mean actually cutting multiple trillions of dollars a year just to balance the budget, right? Not to start paying down national debt, but just to balance the budget so we're not going further into debt every year. Or you look at 2 states like Florida versus California. California this year is expected to have a $45 billion deficit.
It's unbelievable.
And this is a state government, remember. So they have to balance their budget, in the long term, medium term, and short term, because they can't print money like the federal government can. Like California can't monetize their debt. So any deficit they rack up has to be paid back in the form of higher taxes on California taxpayers. So they have a $45 billion deficit in 1 year. Meanwhile, Florida is projected to have a $7 billion surplus. So you can't just say, oh, it's the economy, because Florida is dealing with the same economy as California is in the year, of 2024. But when you look at what California spends per capita, it's double what Florida spends. So people say, well, how does Florida offer any services, or how do they meet, the needs of their citizens the way that California does? And the answer is, in a state like Florida, we don't. We just expect less government, less programs, less services. And so we get taxed less. I mean, it's that simple. And again, same economy. This is like a split test. I come from a marketing background, right? So we A/B split test everything. Same economy. California, $45 billion deficit. Florida has a $7 billion surplus this year. I'm not sure what Minnesota's is.
We keep running. We bring in more revenue than we're projected, so we keep adding to the surplus. It's just a couple billion, but that's so obvious because in an inflationary environment, that inflation runs through to the revenue services of government. It's shocking what's happening in California, but it's not a shock that a lot of these other places are getting surpluses.
The most important thing to look at, because you can't just pick one metric, right? That's that kind of always be when people do that on both the left and the right, when they pick one metric and cherry pick. I think the most important, if you look at it holistically, is where are people moving? Like, which states have net migration? And Florida leads the pack on that. More people are getting the hell out of California every year, as well as states like, New York, Illinois, and Minnesota. Like, people are leaving because they don't want to stay in high tax states. And either you can believe that that's a total coincidence and, it's just weird. Like, the more taxes and the more government a state has, the more people don't want to live there and they leave. Or you can connect the dots and kind of remove your head from your ass and realize that people are making logical decisions to move from Minnesota to Florida, or from California to Arizona, or Illinois to Texas, New York to Florida, et cetera. So, I mean, hopefully the state government in Minnesota can try to start being more competitive, because people don't want to move. It sucks moving your family. It sucks. I've had this conversation with many of my aunts, uncles, cousins, even brothers and sisters living in Minnesota, and they would love to leave, but family is the reason they're anchored down. Like, I don't want to leave my family. All the family lives here. And so they just bend over and take it from the Minnesota government with these taxes. And Minnesota politicians know that. They know that people have family there, and that's why they don't leave. It's almost like this form of fiscal blackmail.
Well, and aging parents is, I think, the bigger one. That's certainly hitting a lot of us. I would say the one other thing we got going for us, the largest tracts of wilderness east of the Mississippi are the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota and the Everglades in Florida. And I just got out of the Boundary Waters. I'm telling you, I have very little desire to go camping in the Everglades, but it was great up in the Boundary Waters. So that's the thing we got going for us, is when you go north in Minnesota, you got great scenery, absolutely, great wildlife.
If Minnesota could figure out a way to lower taxes and be more like, North Dakota, South Dakota, even Iowa, is much more tax competitive than Minnesota is. Minnesota would be like a shining star example of economic growth, because the quality
100%.
of life is, great. You get 4 seasons. Unfortunately, winter lasts longer than I would like it to, but there is 4 distinct seasons in Minnesota. Don't have much to root for in terms of pro sports teams. I think it's been since 1991 since a Minnesota team has even been to a championship game, which is the longest championship drought in major sports history. I think
I think Iowa's got a longer drought going for it.
Well, okay, for any city or state that has the 4 major sports, I think the second worst is Phoenix. But Phoenix recently went to an NBA Finals. But prior to that, it had been 20 years. It's in Minnesota, it's been over 30 years. no team has even sniffed like going to the NBA Finals or World Series or the Super Bowl, obviously, or Stanley Cup, and since a Kirby Puckett and Ken Herbeck back in '91. So I wish I could justify moving back and growing a business there because I have so many friends and family there, but I just don't like the trend. I don't like the trend that it's going, and I wonder at what point does it bottom out? At what point does it get so bad that people demand reform? Maybe that'll happen in the next year. Maybe once we head into a recession here over the next year, people will demand, change. But seeing Walz win again, that last election was kind of like the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah, but I know the Republicans put up the wrong guy. K Liquid says, just take a vacation a couple times per year back to Minnesota for your outdoor fun, Jake. You know what? I get more of a pull for me to go to Texas. I got really close friends. My brother and his family is in Dallas area. You got the scene going on in Austin, Texas that everyone's loving, the comedy scene, the podcasting world. That's where your boy Alex Jones is, by the way. They're Jesse. So, but no, I don't know. The tax. Listen, I'm the kind of guy that goes to the best tax state out there, Alaska. Unfortunately, I can't convince the wife to pick up and move to Alaska. That's a tough one. But that's where it really treats you well because they actually pay you to be a citizen in Alaska, right?
Right. Yeah, oil dividends. Yeah.
That's right. All right. So here's what. I had run across this idea the other day. Biden doing well with some of the older demographics. Trump's leading on the economy. However, amongst the old, it doesn't seem to be a big tactical advantage for Trump. And the theory that I'd heard was, well, why everyone here is feeling the pain, right? K-Liquid, you got little kids. I got little kids. Tim, you got a 6-month-old daughter now? What is the?
She's actually 19 months old now. Yeah.
Isn't that crazy how fast things move? Okay, so you have inflation hitting the family budget, no doubt about it. But when you think about the elderly, they have the bigger nest eggs. Okay, they've had a long time to save. They've probably been more frugal. They are sitting on their major asset, which most people's major asset is their home, which has been inflated huge time in price. And they're in the downsizing portion of their life. So they're selling homes at a huge appreciated value and then buying a downsized home without financing it with today's 7% interest rate. So when you think about it, the elderly maybe don't think the economy is that bad under Joe Biden. Where all the rest of us are like, what the hell's going on here?
Yep, you are absolutely right that the boomers who now are like the people that are aging, because historically when we think of boomers, we think of people that were like 55, 60. It's like, no, a lot of boomers are, well into their 70s now. They're becoming kind of elderly, right? Yep. And that generation is more insulated from economic reality than maybe any generation in like the 250-year history of America. Because you look at when most of the baby boomers were born, in the 50s and I guess technically into the 60s, their career when they were investing the most of their savings into their like retirement plans, the stock market, et cetera, their careers were the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, which was the most prosperous era of stock market growth in like not just American history but world. I mean, even the 2010s specifically, a lot of people talk about the 80s and 90s as being kind of the booming times of the American economy with Reagan and Clinton, but the 2010s were actually one of the most crazy runs of stock market growth ever. Like after we got out of the Great Recession, we've been in just a crazy bull market throughout the 2010s. Inflation was very, very low. The economy was amazing. Like people forget how good the economy was during Trump's 4-year term as president. Like unemployment was very reasonable. Stock market was hitting highs, but more importantly, wage growth adjusted for inflation. Wage growth had never been higher amongst the middle class and the poor working class. Right. Wages were actually growing even relative to inflation, where right now that's not happening at all. Like wages might be up, 5% in the last couple of years, but inflation is up 20%. So actually people are making less money. Even if they got a raise, people are making less money than they were 4 years ago. I actually have a really good buddy who's probably not watching this show, so I can tell his story. He's an analyst like corporate at a Bank of America in Charlotte, their corporate headquarters. He has like 12 master's degrees in math and economics, and I don't even know what else. Like he works high up in their like data modeling department at Bank of America. Really good job, 6-figure job. And he was complaining to me that he's like, I have gotten extremely minimal raises, and I'm actually making less money now than when I started here 5 years ago.
100%. Yeah, I was just saying that to somebody the other day. I feel like I've gotten a pay cut just by the amount of inflation.
He's making considerably less money. So he's not talking like, 1 or 2% less. He's like, I'm probably making 10 to 20% less money than I was when Trump was president, back in 2019 and into 2020, because my wages basically stayed the same, but inflation is just murdering the actual purchasing power there. So elderly people, those that are, let's say now in their 60s, 70s, their stock portfolios have just grown parabolically, like crazy over the last couple decades. They all owned homes, so they appreciated from the, the home equity surge that obviously we've seen in the last 5 years with all the COVID lockdowns and the Fed manipulating interest rates. So Jake, you're absolutely right. Like they are not feeling the pain of how bad this economy actually is for working class and middle class families. Like if you go grocery shopping, you can't look someone in the eye and tell them that inflation is 3%.
Right.
It's like, are you joking? And also one point I want to make, maybe I'm preaching to the choir here, but how they calculate inflation, like the unstated assumptions when the Fed or, the White House talks about inflation, it's so sneaky how they do it. Is they say, hey, inflation is finally under control. In May, when we got the CPI, like there was no inflation in the month of May, right? And everyone's like over the moon about that. And I think the PPI was actually negative. There was deflation for PPI, which is basically business B2B purchases. There was actually deflation in May. But when the Fed gets inflation, let's say down to 2%, which is obviously always the target to get it to 2%, that doesn't mean they're getting rid of any of the inflation of the last 5 years. It just means it's no longer getting worse.
Curbing it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's just growing at 2%, which they view as manageable. That was actually Milton Friedman's fault way back in the day. Right. That a 2% became the Fed target because they wanted to kind of index it to average economic growth. But obviously, when if inflation is good at 2%, it still means it's getting worse at 2%. So that provides zero relief for any of the families that now can't afford groceries, can't afford to take, a vacation, can't afford to upgrade their car, even if their vehicle has 250,000 miles because new cars are so expensive. Like inflation being down to 2% is really just a relief for people who were already doing well, where inflation was more of like an annoyance, right? Like if you're doing well financially, inflation is kind of just more an inconvenience. It's like, oh man, I go out to eat now with my family. Instead of the bill being $80, it's now $120. And if you're doing well financially, it's kind of like, well, whatever, I have the money for it. It's annoying. It's emotionally annoying, but it's not actually affecting your lifestyle. It's not like you can't afford to go out to eat anymore. Well, guess what? There's a lot of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans, where when inflation, is basically 30 to 40% since COVID, which it is. Yep. If you actually look at what things cost, groceries, housing, vehicles, like inflation is more in like the 30 to 50% range since COVID. It's not anywhere near, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9% or whatever number, that the feds are pulling out of their asses, right? That means that those people now cannot afford to do things that they could afford to do before. Like their lifestyle actually gets worse. They don't have money to buy a nicer used car, not even a new car, but just a used car. They don't have money to take a vacation, even if it's a more inexpensive vacation where maybe they're driving just across state to go to Wisconsin Dells or something. It's not a $20,000 Disney World vacation, right? People don't have money for things that they had money for five years ago. So saying that inflation is finally coming down and doing this victory lap as if we accomplished something really is tone deaf.
Well, and the thing that bugs me so much is they're the culprits of the whole thing. It's so dishonest, and this is kind of where I wanted to go with this conversation with you, Tim. So I wrote an article March 18th of 2020, and this was actually critical of Donald Trump as president because he was pushing forward this bailout program. This basically, we're going to hand out stimulus checks to families. And it was so obvious to me that, prior to this, the major inflation of the money supply was following the Great Recession, and that went into asset classes, right? It went to the big banks, the big institutions. This one went right in the hands of everyday consumers, and we would have saw inflation a lot quicker had people not paid down debt right away, which was a nice symptom right off the bat. And then, so it's fair to be critical of Trump because he issued this program. Then Biden gets into office and goes on steroids. I mean, I don't remember what the check was. It was like $7,000 because the family 5 and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, and then multiple different checks. You're just handing to people. It's like, this was all predictable. This was all predictable. This was going to go right in consumer prices. And they act as if, wow, I don't know, this crazy inflation. Where did this thing come from?
Yeah, everyone's like, no one could have saw this coming. And then they had the balls to name it the Inflation Reduction Act.
Oh, yeah. The one that's expanding climate change proposals, right?
That will go down as maybe the most Orwellian bill name potentially in American history. It's like right up there with the Patriot Act and the Alien and Sedition acts that they used to jail presidents way back in the day. I mean, calling that
vice presidents.
Right, there you go. Right.
So, but no, that's a great point because it literally, you'll hear Amy Klobuchar say this. We've made historic investments fighting climate change thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. What the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
Like, are you serious? You're spending money to fight inflation? What are we talking about here? This was all predictable, and they're the culprits. They're the ones behind it. This is what I want to ask you, Tim. I need your thoughts on how Chuck Schumer was grilling his burger. Because, we don't need to talk about monetary policy here. How's Chuck Schumer grilling his damn burger? That's the most important issue out there right now. Do you ever get the feeling they're just distracting us with bullshit all the time so that we're not paying attention to the main culprits of this bad economy? Do you get that feeling? That's what I feel.
It just shows you how tone deaf the political class really is. And for those who aren't understanding the reference here, Chuck Schumer posted on Twitter over the Father's Day weekend a photo of, like, obviously a staged photo of him, like he's about to grill burgers, and there's all these completely raw burger patties on the grill. I don't even think the grill had been turned on.
Well, the hot dogs were burnt, so it had to been turned on at some point.
It was clearly a staged photo, though. He wasn't actually, and you know this, or at least you would hope, you would assume he knows this, because there was like slices of cheese on these completely raw burger patty. I mean, completely raw. Like, they had been set on the grill seconds before the photo was taken, and he puts the cheese on that. It's like, okay, well, I don't know if you're trying to kill your whole family, but with like food poisoning. But the fact that, not that they took the picture and they were so dumb that they did that, but then they posted it and they looked at it again and no one caught that, like, hey, there's something very wrong with this picture, because clearly he's not actually out grilling with the family. It's just a photo op to get a bunch of engagement on his social media for Father's Day. And yet these people want to tell you how to live your life. Chuck Schumer, who doesn't know how to grill a cheeseburger, wants to be able to send your kids, your daughters as well as your sons, to go fight and die in Ukraine or in the Middle East, and he doesn't know how to grill a cheeseburger on Independence Day. It just shows how tone deaf they are to what the average American family is going through right now.
Kay Liquid says, I don't get the feeling that's exactly what they're doing. Some crazy shenanigans happen. Oh my gosh, did you see they said aliens are real? I'm not saying that this photo is staged. I think you got to write the right synopsis. He's just trying to act like he's a common guy, which is like, right. These are lizard people. They're not common people. But it's like, then you see these alien stories. You see the culture wars that are going on. And I'm just getting to the point where, and then we've talked to Royce White about this, it's like they want to just stir up these tensions among the population, and we feed into it. Yeah, we have to bring it up on the show.
Like,
and stuff
for example,
like
Caitlin Clark, that whole NBA.
Oh,
the
that's a
WNBA,
great one.
That one is like, I think that one is all fake, and it's all just designed to try to get white Republicans to care about the WNBA. Because now all of a sudden, we got all these Republicans talking about Caitlin Clark. I think it's all a scam just to get more eyeballs on it.
I don't know what white Republicans have to do with it. You just get any
those
eyeballs
are
on the
no,
WNBA
but those are
at
the
this
people,
point.
I mean, those are the people that are for Caitlin Clark.
Yeah.
That's the market.
Well, long story short,
they're actually still losing money in the WNBA. They've never had a profitable season. It's still completely subsidized by the NBA. So she's bringing a ton of exposure to the sport, which is great. And I'm actually an admirer of Caitlin Clark, that she constantly has so much class that she takes like the moral high ground whenever they interview her about, hey, was this too tough of a foul, or what did you think about this or that? And she constantly just brings it back to basketball and doesn't let her emotions get the best of her. I mean, she's like a sponsor's dream in terms of how elite she is as an athlete, but also how mature she is for her age.
But see, Tim, we're now just falling in the same trap here.
Right.
You went from talking about major problems. Hold on.
Well,
the
I'm not
major
gonna be
problems
tricked.
with our economy, the reckless spending in Washington, D.C. leading inflation, and now we're going to go into Caitlin Clark. It's almost as if, this is all designed in some regards to keep us not paying attention to how they're screwing us. Mm-hmm. Because, and I get it. I mean, I'm not trying to be like so lame, because you hear those people in politics like, oh, stop worrying about sports, Sports are fun. It's
bread and circuses.
Yeah, it's just that at some point, and maybe the polls are showing it a little bit, but not enough. I mean, this is one of the problems with Trump electorally. He's just barely beating this walking zombie. Like, this weekend was interesting. This is actually something we should be paying attention to. The literal videos we were watching of the walking zombie who occupies the Oval Office. Like, this guy is not all right. And we're pretending like he is. Well, we're not pretending, but the mainstream media is pretending like he's okay.
It's really hard for me to believe that Biden is not going to be replaced as the nominee at some point in the next 90 days. Everyone knows, like, it's not, Tim's hot take here. Everyone knows there's no way he could finish out another 4-year term.
Here's the solution. This is go line F16 there, or F15, Dawson. This is a Washington Post. There's a column out here. This is the big strategery. Biden should replace Kamala Harris with Hillary Clinton, columnist suggests. A Washington Post columnist thinks President Biden would erase concerns about his advanced age by kicking unpopular Vice President Kamala Harris off the ticket and replacing her with Hillary Clinton. Kathleen Parker, the Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist who weighs in on politics and culture for the Washington Post, said that the 76-year-old former Secretary of State who lost the 26th presidential election to Donald Trump would extricate the U.S. from its, quote, old white men dilemma, end quote.
I don't even know what to say to that.
Oh, like if you want to sink that campaign worse, oh my God, I can't imagine a worse ticket than those two people on the same one. And then everyone knows what's going on. You're backdooring the first female president, which is clearly one of the things they want to do. And by the way, there are some great women in this country. Hillary Clinton's not one of them. If we want to have our first woman president, have it not be her, right? Mm-hmm. By the way, what came up on my social media feed was that Norm Coleman when he was on The View. Have you ever seen that one where he's like, the Clintons are murderers? And they're like trying to shut him up. They literally, Joy Behar puts her hand over his mouth. You can't say that on air. And of course, Norm's just like leaning into it. What? I thought they were murdered. I thought that was a matter of record.
Oh,
great bit.
You said Norm Coleman, not
Did I
Norm
say Norm
Macdonald.
Coleman? Norm
I
Macdonald,
was like,
I'm sorry.
Norm Coleman was calling
I'm so
Hillary
sorry.
Clinton a murderer.
How dare I say
that would be crazy. I have seen Norm Macdonald do that.
Did I really say Norm Coleman?
You said Norm Coleman.
Oh my God. Way different.
Television, yeah.
Yeah. Norm Macdonald. My bad on that one. We are coming up to an hour here. Tim, do you want to stick around for the post show, or do you got to run here at the hour?
Yeah, sure. I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Let's get to the
sharing the economy too, like what's going on at the macro level.
Okay, let's save that for the post show. For those people that are subscribers, if you're not a subscriber, go on Rumble. You can click join, $8 a month. You get the insider information. By the way, that's what's unique about our show is we're just a bunch of political operatives that actually have some inside views on how things go.
Let's see,
Plus, you get a guy like this who's
we got a $5 Rumble rant from Failed Candidate says, now you're doing it, Jake. Why breathe air into the Hillary Clinton story? We are in serious economic times.
fair point, Brad. Fair point. Yes, exactly. I just took the bait, and I mean, the part of the problem with the culture wars are they do make an impact in life, especially when you get like this indoctrination by the LGBTQIA plus 2S, whatever. But it just sucks when you don't see enough attention being put on the most important stuff. We don't even talk about Ukraine anymore. Like how there's no victory in Ukraine. Like that. Like what do we do? Like literally, I think the United States policy, without actually saying it, is we just want to let more Ukrainians and Russians die to starve Russia.
Well, and they want to mandate the draft now, so that it's not that people 18 to 20 or men 18 to 26 are required to instead of being required to file, now they're just automatically going to be filed inside of a draft like that. And I thought the age was 25, so I thought I was getting out of the draft. I guess I'm still involved. But, they better not try to push anything because I'm not going.
Yeah, it wouldn't happen that quickly. Boy, if I could ever think of a bigger rallying cry for liberty since COVID is that.
Yep.
BJDC, some comments from this guest are disheartening for Minnesotans. This is called The Truth Hurts, by the way. Sometimes the truth hurts. Those who are staying in Minnesota and fighting back need encouragement. Jake, you often tell your listeners not leave Minnesota. Yeah, it's because selfishly, I'm going to say that until I actually leave. Then I'll be like, it wasn't. No. The honest thing here is, I mean, if you can do it, how much heartache do you want from a state that doesn't seem to like you? What I see is optimism. The way that I understand how politics work, and because, I founded Action for Liberty, still very involved with Action for Liberty. It's now run by Eric Mortensen, very smart, strategic-minded guy. I actually see some hope to turn things around. It's not going to happen overnight. That's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in the sense that you don't have radical socialists take over government and change everything overnight. But it's a curse because we really need to radically change the way Minnesota's going, and it doesn't happen overnight. But I could see some fundamental things happening that can move us in the right direction. There are people like me, that have, like, let's just say in-laws, and then, also there's other big things business-wise and stuff like that. They keep me in Minnesota, okay? And I truly love the state, and it's the old adage, why should I leave? They're the ones that suck, right? So, but you make compelling points. Just on the tax situation alone, if that was the only factor, you can't make a good argument for Minnesota. You can't. It's impossible. The numbers don't lie.
My house in Florida is completely free to me because the tax savings are so immense that it more than covers my mortgage payment, insurance, property taxes.
Yeah, isn't that crazy to think about that?
Living in Minnesota. And so it'll be multiple millions. Obviously, when you look at investing, it can compound over your lifetime to be a lot of money if you live in a lower tax jurisdiction. So, hopefully Minnesota lowers their taxes and becomes more competitive, because there's a lot of people who want to live there, like myself included. I would love to be able to justify living in Minnesota, but when I look at the numbers, it's like, it's just not worth it.
Razzle Dazzle says, flee or fight, lead, follow, or get the hell of the way. And that's exactly it. That's a very good point. And the way I look at it, liberty is so precious that you either got to go move to go seek it or you fight it. And you got to understand, Florida went for Obama, right? 2 election cycles. So, I mean, that's 2012. That was less than 10 years. 10 years before DeSantis turned it to a plus, I shouldn't say just DeSantis, but it was a plus 20 for the Republicans. It's not even a toss-up state anymore, right? I'm old enough to remember Bush Gore. So It's like things changed. I mean, Ted Cruz was in a battle for his life 6 years ago. They thought Texas would vote in a Democrat. So Montana still has Democrats that win statewide. I mean, Montana, right? South Dakota had Tom Daschle back in the early 2000s. He was the Senate Majority Leader. Nevada had Harry Reid.
West Virginia
has got a Democrat. I mean, I guess he's now independent,
but,
whatever it is.
Robert Byrd before that, who was a
There you
Democrat
go.
KKK leader.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to fight no matter what. And just because you get to Florida doesn't mean that everything's solved. And it depends on where you live in Florida, right? By the way, if you live near a metro area, you probably don't have a mayor and city council that's Republican, or no, I shouldn't say Republican's the solution to this whole thing. I want to bring up our other sponsor here, Yes Solutions. This is the Patriot Carla Nelson, not to confuse with Senator Carla Nelson, who I don't even know what Senator Carla Nelson does for a living. She's just a legislator. I don't really know.
I don't know. Probably retired.
Probably. I don't know. Maybe it was a lobbyist. Was she a legislator?
Yeah,
I don't
right.
know.
Something like that.
Well, we're talking about the Patriot Carla Nelson. She runs Yes Solutions LLC, which is locally owned. It stands for Your Easy Shipping Solutions. If you need to ship anything, whether it's one pallet or a truckload or multiple truckloads through U.S. and Canada, you can get a hold of Yes Solutions. They know how to solve your shipping needs. You're running a business, give Yes Solutions a call. We like to give business to the people that are patriots here. She says call Kyle. It's probably because she doesn't want her phones, off the hook every day. I don't know. I would call Carla, but she says give Kyle a call today at 651-797-2451. Also, we're brought to you by Alpine Cabinetry in St. Cloud, Minnesota. Speaking of God's country.
Yeah,
good
and
old St.
I
Cloud.
see one comment. Razzle Dazzle says, can we make Patriot Carla Nelson a senator? No, but you can make her a state representative because Carla Nelson is running for the state house. So people can check that out. I think it's carlaforkids.com.
All right, so we're going to stick around with you, Tim, in the post show. Let's see here. You got something on Otter Tail County, Jesse. Oh, let's get into Alex Jones in the post show.
Yep.
Oh, and then Pfizer being sued by the Kansas AG. Pull this article up real quick here before we sign out here, Dawson. This is on truthhurtsnews.com. You can go to Truth Hurts News to read this. We actually got the complaint, the one that was filed in court. But this is the Attorney General. You're not going to see this in Minnesota.
And I think he's a newly Republican, right?
Yeah, well, it's definitely
I'll
not
have
Keith.
to look at it.
It's definitely not a Keith Ellison type Attorney General. This is Chris Kobach, who filed a lawsuit against pharmaceutical company Pfizer for misleading deceptive statements made when marketing their experimental COVID jab. According to the complaint filed with the court, Kobach argues Pfizer violated Kansas's Consumer Protection Act when, quote, Pfizer misled the public that it had a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine. One of the most disturbing things from the complaint was found on page 26. Quote, as of February 28, 2021, Pfizer possessed reports for 458 pregnant women exposed to its COVID-19 vaccine during pregnancy. More than half of the pregnant women, 248 cases, or 54%, reported an adverse event from Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine, while fewer than half did not report an adverse event. They also go on to complain about or put a allegation that Pfizer's marking the jab as preventing transmission, although, as we all know, and we've played on the show, they admitted, I think this was European Parliament, that they were never actually tested it for that. Mm-hmm. So we'll keep you up to date on this lawsuit, but there's very good things. And as soon as I mentioned this, I realized Florida has a Surgeon General who literally recommended not getting the jab. Mm-hmm. So there's another thing you guys got going for you. Like,
right.
It's unbelievable. Like, truth teller, right? That's just so awesome that he would do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, where you live matters. The culture of where you live matters. That's kind of the point I was making before, that historically people really only move states because of like fiscal policy, which state had the higher income tax, lower income tax, et cetera. But what we've seen a lot in the last couple of years is honestly people getting fed up with the social cultural direction of their state, and wanting to move somewhere where the overall vibe of the state and the culture was more aligned with their beliefs. And people didn't really have to factor that into their decisions in the United States just 10 years ago, right? Like, there were left-wing states like California or New York or whatever, but they didn't ram their beliefs down your throat the way that they do now, where you would literally pack up and leave for another state just because of social cultural issues. And that actually is becoming a thing in the last 5 years. I mean, civil liberties were a thing in the last couple of years, of being able to have Thanksgiving dinner with your family, or not being mandated to wear a mask outside.
Which Walz did. He literally said you couldn't go see your family during Thanksgiving dinner.
Yep. So
he banned dart throwing in bars. He then shut down bars twice. K-Liquid, when both of my grandmas died, not from COVID, during the COVID hysteria, that was the first time I really looked at moving from Minnesota. I didn't know that, Nick. It's interesting. Razzle Dazzle, is this Kansas City lawsuit? Yeah, go to truthhurtsnews.com. Let's get into What's going on with Alex Jones in the post show? Because I know you're just chomping the bit, MAGA Jesse, to talk about your boy, who's possibly going to lose his whole company, all his assets here in a matter of time. Thanks to Warren Wessel of Keller Williams Realty. If you're buying or selling home in Minnesota, Wisconsin, not in Florida, because he's not licensed in Florida. God, then we know things really gone down the hill when he does. Yeah, exactly. Yet. All right. Stick around with us in the post show. If you're not a subscriber, click the join on our Rumble page, and I'll take you to Locals. Locals is where we do our post show. We'll see you there in 1 minute. Take care.